I'll get the ticket.
I can't believe I didn't recognize him. I fell asleep.
Making that recording. I'll go ahead and walk them over.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with our afternoon session. I don't know if y'all can hear me. The mic is not on. There. There we go. Can y'all hear me? Still working? Okay. So we would like to welcome Dr. David Doc Jones, co-founder and program director on Safety on Two Wheels and Motorcycle Safety Foundation rider coach, and Vicki Sanfilippo, registered nurse and executive director of accident scene management, Road Guardians. You can read more about them in your program. Please joining me in thanking Doc and Vicki for participating with us today. And come on up.
Here and then get lower. In the morning when Dr. Oates was finding out who all was here, I gathered the majority of people in this room are avid riders. I didn't turn around and start raising hands. Try not to bore you. You probably made a lot of long distance trips on your own. But for those who haven't, I want to talk about some of the things that pop up. I am a doctor, but I had a lot of my students say, well, are you still practicing? Like, no, there's no F's. I'm not a dentist. What does the DD stand for? Well, daredevil. That gets their attention. But anyway, interesting. I started writing in 1973, in my junior, senior year in high school against my parents' wishes. Most of y'all in my category probably done the same thing. So similar story. I started actually traveling a month after I got out of high school. And I've actually traveled over 700,000 miles across the United States, Mexico, tipped into Canada a couple of times just since I've been traveling. And I want to talk about traveling because one of the things that I've realized is a lot of people get stuck on even making that decision in the first place. Notice here, it says I've retired from any kind of current profitable venture. Starting a nonprofit is truly a nonprofit. It's out of labor of love to try to help people stay alive. And I've watched enough people over my nearly 50 years of riding and I've lost a lot of friends. And so being able to ride safe and enjoy your trip is very important to me and to pass that on to the next generation. So on the next slide. Are you ready for your road trip? Here are the topics I want to cover. Trip planning mistakes, preparing yourself and your bike for your trip, planning the actual trip, packing for the trip, and a contingency plan. I don't know if you ever watched that Deadpool show when all of a sudden things go sideways and everything fell apart. That's kind of what can happen while we're on a motorcycle. So planning a trip mistakes, right off the bat. Next slide. Many road trips fail before they even start. And the problem is pursue your dream. I can't imagine, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to about, I want to do this someday. I want to go on a trip someday. And I haven't found someday on the calendar yet. It's Monday through Sunday. And I've learned in life, if I don't pick a date, I won't make it. And I've also learned in life, if I don't shoot for the stars, I'd rather shoot for the stars and fail and land on the moon than shoot for mediocrity and get it every time. And so picking a date will be the first thing we sometimes fail at. Second is, where do you want to go? A lot of novice riders getting on a motorcycle are thinking of a destination vacation instead of the vacation beginning when you leave the parking lot. And so they're looking at where we want to go, how long is it going to take to get there? Next one is how far away is it? Next one, look at the smartphone. How long is it gonna take me to get there? Next one. We don't realize it takes longer on a motorcycle than a car. Okay, and Dr. Oaks touched on this morning, and I believe someone else did from TTI about the fatigue that's involved on riding a motorcycle. So I tried to help people realize that if the GPS says it's gonna take you 7 hours to get there, you're already under the gun. You've already lost the battle if you're gonna period of time, because we've got fatigue, you've got the wind, you've got everything else that's working against you. Next slide. And again, what's your health? Back up the slide, did we miss a slide? Yes, we did.
Yep.
It's possible. Oh, there we go. Did we talk about mistakes? We did.
Here we go. Don't forget how big Texas is. Oh my God, I don't care where you live, unless you're living in Houston and you're going east. Your first day is just getting out of the state. Your second day is just getting back in the state. And that's if you're good at riding several hundred miles in a day. And so what we gotta do is keep in mind where we live, how far we're gonna go, what means we're gonna get there. And like I said, don't trust the GPS. It's gonna lie to you. Cannot make it in that amount of time. Shooting for long distances typically has us prepare for things that we're not really ready for, first of all. Next one. What's your health? How much do you ride weekly? What's your longest ride you've been on before you actually go on a big ride? Plan on stops per hour just to walk around, eat, snack, drink water. It's already proven most Americans don't drink enough water to begin with, and now you're sitting on a motorcycle. If it's summertime, you're hot and you're sweaty. Even if it's cool breeze in the spring, you don't realize how much you've lost your water. You start to dehydrate. You're on medication. Sometimes as we get older, we end up picking up that medication we didn't have when we were younger. Is that going to work with our riding? How's it going to affect our balance? Does it affect how we breathe? You're on medication sometime, have you talked to your doctor to see what you've got? You have enough medication to go with you. Here's one that's kind of dear to my heart, it's T-clocks. Which one of you actually do T-clocks? Who even knows what T-clocks is? Thank you. The rest of you don't. I'm going to give you a quick instruction of what T-clocks
just-
is. It's a pre-ride inspection.
Yes.
It's supposed to be done every day you get on your bike. And a lot of people don't get on the bike. They'll just kind of look at it and say, yep, I got tires. I got gas. I'm ready to go. Haven't done anything else. The reason T-clocks is important to me is that's one of my problems that I failed at when I was young at 82. I was traveling with a friend and we did something kind of stupid. We took non-off-road drive motorcycles, four-wheel road, going up, take a picture of a waterfall in Colorado. Rocky Road, get back. I didn't check my tires the next morning. Now we're up in Independence Pass. I'm zipping around through Independence Pass on a B65 Sabre pulling a trailer. And somehow the front tire blew out. Kind of ruined the whole trip. That's the only accident I've had an issue with on a trip like this because I didn't do T-clocks. I've traveled with people and after about 2 or 3 days, I look at it and said, when's the last time you looked at your tire? Well, the tire looks good. I checked the far left. We'll look at the side of the tire where you don't ride. And there's plenty of tread, but right down the middle where most people are riding because they're riding straight up all the time, it's worn out. So we got to do T-clock. Depending on how far you're going to ride, you may need to consider whether you need to buy tires on your trip or buy new tires before your trip. These are issues that'll sneak up on you before you realize what's going on. Next one. This is your first big ride. Remember the bike, the vacation, and the drive, not the same. Your vacation starts when you leave the driveway. We need to have a change of mindset when we come to motorcycle trips. What we need to keep in mind is, if we're going to be longer than 3 days, plan your ride. Or, depending on how you travel, change the way you travel. Like I said, GPS times do not count when you're taking a motorcycle. We've got wind, weather, fatigue, butt wear. I'm not talking about what you wear on your butt. I'm talking about the wear on your butt. Okay? You ride a cruiser, 10 times out of 9, your seat's going to be carrying all the weight. Seat of your pant. You're on a crotch rocket, now your weight's in your shoulders. have a tendency, if you're on an upright bike or a naked bike or adventure bike, that I'm riding right now, it's a lot more comfortable to ride longer distances. That means I get tired. All of a sudden it hits me because I'm not used to getting off the bike every hour or so. Next thing you know, I'm 2 hours into the trip, now I'm tired. What happens when you get tired? You're not alert. You're not thinking of things. You're not thinking about safety. You're not preactively looking for everything that you need to be looking for. Next one. Yeah, but back up. Depending on the type of travel, planning can be very different. Traveling to a specific destination takes more research. When you think about travel, just think about where you're going to go first. You need to plan it. Then where you're going to stay, where you're going to eat, what your fuel is going to be, or directional exploration, which is my favorite way of traveling. That's where you pick a direction and you start going. Takes more time, but it's a lot more fun. Destination travel, you must calculate mileage into your time to get destination, divide each day accordingly. And I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. For longer distance traveling, talking about week plus, consider your saddle time. Get someplace quicker, fatigue's going to set in. If you mess up and get monkey butt too soon, then you got a problem. For directional travel, firstly, no planning is involved, except keeping in mind how much you're going to travel each day. And a rule of thumb that I have used, and it's worked very well for me, is the 3-8-6. I don't want to travel more than 300 miles on a motorcycle. I don't want to spend more than 8 days or 8 hours in a day in the travel, and that means stopping, walking, resting, sightseeing. I don't want to get there before 6 p.m.
Mhm.
So if you keep those in mind, now you can have an enjoyable trip, which means you may not travel as far each day as you would in your car. I remember my first trip to Daytona. We looked on our map. This is back before GPS, so there were maps, young lady. Big old honking fold up maps, how they got them folded up in the first place, I have no idea. But from Amarillo, Texas, Daytona is only 19 hours. We figured 2 days we could do it. No, it didn't work. In fact, we were 2 days late getting where we wanted to go. It took us longer to get there. We got to look at the time that's involved. Next thing, packing for a trip.
Did I?
One more. Bingo.
I don't know what is going on.
One more clip. Do you really need the kitchen sink? Do you take everything we got to get? Amazed at how much stuff we will pack. Have you even looked at the GBR? Gross vehicle weight. I asked my students, I'm teaching the class, which one of you read the manual when you buy your motorcycle? Of course, none of the guys raise their hand at all. Give me the keys, show me how to figure it. I'll figure it out on my own. Once you read your manual, you got to make necessary suspension adjustments, tire pressure adjustments, balance your load. People don't think about balancing their load. I have you remember your load triangle. Put your bike, you're too much gear on the back of your bike, you're gonna have an issue. See, especially if dual shocks. Most people don't realize this, but if you have a bike that's got dual shocks, you can put too much weight on the back, now you've got a potential problem. There's absolutely no way manufacturers can make every shock exactly the same. Spring load, compression, dip. So now you have inconsistent springs on the back and put too much weight, you end up possibly getting into a high-speed wall. Several manufacturers have found that out the hard way, and now they're making corrections. You got to keep this in mind. Think minimalistic. Plan on a day of 3 to 4 stops for laundry. You have to carry everything you got to get. ATGAT, who knows what ATGAT is?
You haven't told us what T-clock is.
No, I'm not gonna tell you, figure it out on your own.
Basic rider course.
We'll teach you.
You know what the
No.
problem with TLAs is? You don't know what they stand for.
Yeah.
TLAs,
T-clock
three-letter
is
acronym.
how you look at your tires, wheels, everything else that has to do with your motor.
Good.
And then when we get to ATGAT, it's all gear all the time.
Oh.
Neat thing about all gear all the time is if you wear an actual riding gear, I know it looks kind of cheesy. You got a nice jacket on, you got riding pants, not your jeans, actual gear. You know, some people do it. So you're talking about dress for the slide, not for the ride. I said, no, dress for the ride. You're not going to slide. Get prepared to ride. You have your motorcycle gear that's comfortable. Guess what you're wearing every day? your motorcycle gear, so you're not wearing out your pants, you don't have bug juice all over your Levi's. Time you get there, you gotta carry 4 pairs of Levi's. Wear your gear, carry less. Gives you more chance to do things like buying souvenirs while you're traveling, because you're gonna buy souvenirs while you're traveling. I guarantee you, what you leave with, what you come back, is gonna be 2 different weights. Things to consider. Tool kits, tire kits, rain gear. I put here paper map. I don't want a paper map. They have GPS, they have our smartphone.
They are gonna work everywhere.
You're in the middle of nowhere.
GPS will work everywhere, but at the same time, sometimes GPSs aren't gonna get the right information to you. Roads can be closed, GPS won't fix it. I run off a smartphone a lot, smartphone gets lost a lot. Pulling out an old map and learning where you're gonna go kind of keeps you more focused on where you're going instead of just watching that GPS all the time. Next question. Next one. Contingency plan. Guess what? Things do happen. Things go wrong. At any given time of day, life can go sideways. Right here, you need a good first aid kit. You need to know how to use it, even practice it on yourself. Practice taking care of yourself. Wasn't a motorcycle issue, it was a bicycle issue. A lovely bride and I and a friend decided we were going to take our mountain bikes from Houston, Texas, and go up to Colorado and ride the real mountains. We had no idea what we were getting into. Oh, good God, there are real mountains up there. Do you know that? We would stop off at little local bike shops and we'd say, where's a great place to ride? And they would take us and we would huff and puff and we'd get about a quarter of a mile there. Oh, that's not for us. Anyway, we're riding along and all of a sudden, out of left field, this huge tree just reached across my path and knocked me right off the bike. It wasn't me. I didn't ride into it. The tree got me. Tore a hole inside of my cab. My buddy kind of got sick to the stomach. My wife kind of turned her eyes. Now I'm fixing myself. Little tape, pull them back together, wrap it up, because I still had to ride back down the mountain before that tree knocked me off the bike. You gotta know how to use this kind of stuff. Lone riders, anyone want to travel by themselves? It's fun. I have done it. I love it. I love riding with people. I love riding with my wife. But just getting out on your own. What are you doing when you're by yourself? Do you have a spot? 3 gym. And here's where you can find Spot Me. I just listened to a guy earlier, some of you did, with GetRex, REWREXX.com. They're developing a new program for motorcycles that actually fits on the bike itself with the tracking system. Things go south, then it'll notify everybody, and it's on a different system than just the GPS, so everyone has access to it. Well worth considering. The Spot's something you wear. If you're by yourself, if things go south, you can hit the button or you can have it set up so if you dismount the bike, it pulls the trigger. Group riders. People are riding in groups of people. That's a lot of fun, as long as you have things scheduled correctly. And how many of the riders are trained for first aid? How many groups really know how to take care of something besides a Band-Aid or a splinter? Or your aspirin if you have a headache or water? What are you gonna do for road rash, bone breaking, fractures, abrasions? I remember when I was traveling my most in the 80s with a gentleman who had actually been in the military, and he did a lot of, I guess he was a medic. And so he actually helped me learn how to do some things. We even practiced sewing up a squishy orange. It's like you used to sewing tissue up. We had a problem. You know how to find your GPS coordinates. Everyone know how to find your GPS coordinates on your smartphone? If you don't, it's pretty simple. Open up your Google map. It's a little button that says Find Me. Scroll to the bottom of it and you'll see your actual GPS coordinates. Here's where we fall short. Take a screenshot. Because now when you go off of that app to go to your phone to try to find somebody, now you got to go back to where your GPS is. Take a screenshot. Guess what? Where you're most likely going to have an accident where it's going to be life threatening? Out on the road. Why? 1, you're going faster. 2, you're most likely going to leave the curb. That's what we've been finding in all of our studies. We have this inability of target fixation. We look where we're going to go. So when we look at that curve, we don't want to go off on. Next thing you know, we're off the curve trying to figure out what happened. Now you got to
through
get the MS come find you. You may even have phone service there. So now you got to drive someplace to get phone service. So take that snapshot picture. So when you do get service, here's where the action is. Here's the actual coordinates, and they will take it down, read it specific, and they'll know exactly where to go to find what's going on. Next one, please. Become certified road guardian. What is that? Glad you asked. Gotta find out. Consider taking an action scene management basic and advanced course. If you live in Houston area, Wiley and Cook Attorneys for Law and our organization, Safety on Two Wheels, are hosting a 2-day basic and advanced rider course on May 21st, 22nd. We've only got a couple of instructors here in the Texas area. We're gonna have a third one, I understand, in the Houston area. I'm gonna really start promoting this. Every riding group should have a road guardian in their group, maybe 2. Why? What happens if the road guardian goes down? So this is the contingency plan we need to think about, because if we're gonna get out and travel, I want us to travel, I want us to have fun, but the best thing about all my miles of traveling is being able to tell people about it and share it. And remember, because the day will come someday, 20, 40, maybe 50 years from now, when I'm too old to ride. But I'll have all these memories to think about. Any questions? Okay. Well, I want to introduce Vicky Sanfilippo. I crossed paths with her over the phone a few weeks back, a few months back, about this speaking, and that's how we set something up. And so Vicky's going to talk about her organization. This lady is actually in the Sturgis Hall of Fame.
It's true. I even have a tattoo to prove it.
For all the good work she's done.
Cameras.
Perfect segue into this topic of, you do all the planning, you do everything you need to do to prevent a crash from happening in the first place, to keep yourself safe. Absolutely, that is where you should put the majority of your eggs in your basket. However, if you don't have a plan, like a disaster, you've missed an important piece. So that's what we are all about, accident scene management. So some of these statistics are a little bit repeated from this morning, but somebody might not have been in those sessions, so I'm going to tell you again that the fact is that only 3% of crashes involve motorcyclists, or 3% of all registered vehicles are motorcyclists, but 14% of all traffic fatalities involve motorcycles. So that is unacceptable. What David talked about, where he said, well, we don't want any of our friends to be injured, any of our friends to be hurt. That is really where it's at. It's about our brotherhood and our sisterhood and taking care of that person next to you. In the military, they call it buddy care. We all know how to take care of each other. So that is really what we're talking about. Now in Texas, and you can go to the next slide, Texas has particular areas in Texas where it's very heavy in the crashes. Of course, that goes along with the population. Those are areas of heavier population, but also areas where there are a lot of motorcycles riding. So you'll see that it's definitely the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the hill country here, the Austin, San Antonio area, and the Houston area. And if I sound like I know what I'm talking about, I'm from Wisconsin. I did that pretty good though, didn't I? But I actually have been doing quite a bit of research on Texas. Texas is the 3rd highest fatality state in the United States for motorcycles. So it is of concern and needs to be addressed. So we can go to the next slide. So that's kind of where a crash course for the motorcyclist comes in. I'm a registered nurse and spent 10 years as an EMT as well. And as a nurse who rides a motorcycle, I always had people say crazy stuff like, thank God we have a nurse with us. If something happens, you'll know what to do. And every time they said that, I thought, oh my God, they think I learned motorcycle trauma in nursing school. And it's really not that way. As a matter of fact, they don't talk about roadside medicine at all in nursing school. I had everything I needed at my fingertips. So as I started looking for what would I do for my friends, I stumbled upon a guy from Iowa, a pig farmer. His nickname was Slider, and he got his nickname from sliding down the highway. So he was the first person I ever heard of that talked about motorcycle trauma and the specifics of what it is we do. So after that, I actually called him up and I said, hey, Slider, that was like really great information, but now I'm suddenly concerned about me. Who's going to take care of me if I'm the one who goes down? So we talked about it for a little bit. He said something I will never forget. He said, the more people we get trained, the better off we are all going to be. And that is the fact. When a crash occurs, there is going to be a gap of time before that EMS arrives. It could be 5 minutes. If you are out there in the fun twisties where you got no cell service, it could be 20 minutes or even longer. So the things we do as motorcyclists can make the biggest difference. Those first critical moments after a crash occurs. So we have, as an organization that started in 1996, as you can see, you can read the slide. We have trained a lot of people since that time. But when you figure we have 18 million motorcyclists in the United States alone, we have a lot of work to do yet. This is in 25 years. We have trained that many people. So we have instructors in 32 states, and I'm really proud to be able to introduce you to two of our instructors here in Texas. And Penny Fuller from
Austin area.
Austin, yes, from north of there. She'll be teaching a class on June 4th in Austin area. There's flyers out on our table. And we have Twain Thornton, and he is from the Houston area. And I'll be flying down to teach the class that is being done with David, Safety on Two Wheels, and Wiley Cook. And I'll be coming down. It's a sponsor class. It's only $75 for 2 days of training. So that's instead of $200, and it includes lunch both days. So I hope you get a chance to pick up one of these classes. That'll be taught, but really good to see our healthcare professionals stepping up. And but 1/3 of our students end up using the information they learned within 3 years. So that's not a threat, by the way. Some people are like, well, I don't want. So not a threat. So we can go to the next slide. I'm looking for a little clicker. And I used to say click. So the goals and objectives of our program are to reduce injuries and fatalities, and that's why everybody comes. They want to know how they can help their friend, how they can pitch in and be there. But we actually start with rescue or injury, making sure that you, as a rescuer, don't become injured in the process of trying to help someone else. We want to increase the effectiveness of the EMS, and that is the emergency medical system. So that includes your 911 phone call, the police who arrive, the ambulance, all of the emergency workers who come to your scene. The things you do can increase that effectiveness. How many here have been CPR trained? Did that teach you everything you wanted to know about motorcycle trauma? How many have been first aid trained? Did that teach you everything you wanted to know about trauma, motorcycle trauma? No. So those things are great. And we take that and we can springboard from it. But there are specific things that you want to be aware of. As a matter of fact, the things that we see here, these addressing difficult subjects, the reason those are often left out of other kinds of training is because it takes time. You can't properly teach someone how to move an injured person off the road unless you take time to do that. So we do take the time in our class to both tell you how, when, why, and then show you how to do it and you practice that skill. Another thing you learned in CPR is you learned how to do a head tilt chin lift, right? What are you worried about taking a helmet off if you're going to do that, right? Oh, we don't want to take the helmet off. We might cause paralysis, but when we get it off, we're going to go like that, really? Come on. So it makes sense that what we would want to do is keep the spine, and especially the neck area, as still as possible. Now, that requires a special way of learning how to do rescue breathing called jaw thrust, where you lift the tongue off the back of the throat without doing a head tilt chin lift. We also talk about full face helmet removal, how, when, why, and you practice that skill. I wanted this session to actually, for you to go away with some information, usable information. So I'm going to tell you what our program does, but then we're actually going to demonstrate jaw thrust and helmet removal. So that's why you see these things up here. Next. So the way we teach the program is is like this. So I gave you guys this card. It's called a packed card. And we couldn't get it all into 3 segments, and we wanted it to be able to tuck into some small space. So I'm going to show you how to fold it. You're going to fold it in half, where you see that there's a place you can take some information from someone, and you see the logo and it says packed on it. You're then going to fold it again. So now you've got the front page and you see the information that you can gather from somebody on the back. Okay, so that's how it's properly folded. Now, when you look at the front, you're going to have a real quick reminder of what it is you should do first, second, third. So prevent further injury, assess your situation, contact the EMS, and then treat the injured person with life-sustaining care. Now, do we want you to delay a phone call? Why is contact number 3? Of course, we don't want you to delay a phone call. You're going to make that phone call as quick as possible. But what we do know is that you are told in your CPR classes that as soon as you recognize the emergency, you're supposed to leave, go call for help, and then come back. So we don't want you to just leave at this scene when you recognize an emergency. So you call 911 as soon as you can, but if there's no cell phone service, then you're going to have to do some other things first. All right, so, and then you treat the injured person using something called the ABCs of trauma. Next. So in the prevent further injury portion, you want to secure your scene, make sure it's safe. You're going to get control over that traffic. You're going to get vehicles pulled completely off the road. I talked to State Patrol when I put this program together and I said, what do you want me to tell people? So we did interview people who are in the business and ask them, what do you want us to say? And one of the things they told us was that motorcyclists are famous for taking their bikes and trying to use them to deflect traffic. And he says, it doesn't work. He said, you know, don't be using your bikes to try to build some sort of bridge or barrier on the highway to protect your friend who's sitting there in the highway when they could have just gotten up and walked off the highway and get themselves out of harm's way. So you got to get control over certain things. Now, I can't teach an 8-hour program here in 20 minutes. So I'm going to go kind of fast through some of this stuff. But that's the kind of thing that we give you a lot of detail on. How do you do that? You want to protect yourself by taking proper precautions. That's PPE. People are smarter about that all the time than they used to be. Last couple of years have been quite a learning curve for everyone. But yeah, PPE is important. You want to move uninvolved vehicles completely off the road, but the bike itself might be a hazard and might need to be moved as well. So we talk about how to do that, especially if somebody's underneath the bike. How do you get that off of them? And then we do that difficult subject. How do you move somebody? How do you make those decisions when they could just get up and walk off the road? So that would have been bad. That's next. This was a picture that was sent to us by some of our students in Georgia. They had just taken our training and somebody crashed around a curve, hit some gravel, and the motorcycle started to smoke. He was underneath the bike. And they decided that it wasn't safe for them to leave him there, so they dragged him across the road into the shoulder. And as the bike started on fire, the flames hit the tire, the compressed air in the tire. So as that happened. So it was, they called to say, we were so glad we had the confidence to move him and get him out of harm's way because we wouldn't have known what to do.
Wow.
So that's the difference you can make. Another important moving part, probably the most important part that we teach, is how to leave somebody in a safe position. That would be in what's called the recovery position in textbooks, but I like to call it the puke and drool position. So you remember why you're doing it. So you would leave somebody in a sideline position so that they have a decent airway. You don't know when you're coming back to them if they are going to still be breathing. You never want to leave somebody laying on their back. So we have people practice that as well. Good. Go to the next one. So that's kind of like a quick, that's part of prevent further injury. Then we could get to our assessing our situation. When we assess, it's done pretty quickly. We hope that you can just do a quick assessment taking less than 60 seconds. The only time you get stuck is when you find a life-threatening injury. Then you might not be able to leave. to go call for help or to even go check on another person. If you've got squirting blood, you're stuck. You're not going anywhere. So you got to do that quick assessment. You also want to look at we introduced you to something called mechanisms of injury. That's what the EMS talks about. They want to know what caused that injury. And if you have been able to do some of that investigation, you can point it out to them. It's all about time. We want to get them to the hospital as quickly as we can. We want to minimize the time that the EMS spends on scene. So the things you do and the information you give them can be really helpful. So, this is the kind of stuff you're doing during assessment. And I'll go like this.
Okay.
That's okay. So we're going to, when you contact EMS, people are really pretty familiar with how to dial 911 and how to get EMS on their way. The things they're not as familiar with is knowing where they are. So thank you, David, for going through a little bit of the GPS and how to find that. And I love your tip about taking a picture of the screen. I really had not even considered that. That's a great idea. But the person on the other end, depending on where you are, may or may not be able to read that GPS coordinates. So you want to offer it. You want to be ready to give that to them. But you never know who's going to pick up the phone when you dial 911. You know, if you're in Houston or Austin or Dallas area, you're going to get somebody who's got a very sophisticated system. It'll be, you know, they'll be able to take your GPS. They'll have all the help you need. That'll be there soon. If you're out in hill country and I'm going to show you how I know what I'm talking about. And you're at the Three Sisters, right? You know, you're really getting into those twisties and something happens there. You know, who knows who's going to be coming to your scene? They might be in their shorts and they came from the family reunion and they got a little radio on their hip and they're going, oh, you have trauma shears? Yay. You know, so there might be, you know, you'll be working very closely with them. It's kind of the rule of thumb is the longer it takes them to get to you, the less likely it is that you're going to have somebody who's highly trained. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. But that's where we love to ride. That's what we like to do. Now, when you do call 911, the things they want to ask you is they're going to ask what happened. They don't want a big, long diatribe of every detail of what happened. They're looking for, was there is car versus motorcycle? Did they leave the road and they're in a ravine? Did they hit something? Like that guardrail thing they were showing us this morning. You know, did they hit a guardrail and slide along that guardrail? So there is like a lot of little things that matter to them, and let them guide the conversation. They know what they need to say. It's not up to you to try to tell them everything they should know. So they have a certain way of doing things. They want to know how many vehicles were involved. They want to know how many people were injured. This is where it gets hard for bystanders, where it comes to the injuries and how many people. It's better for you to guess high. If you guess too low, then they're only going to send one ambulance when it was like, but there were 3 people. And at first it seemed like they were okay and now they're not. And now you didn't ask for proper help. So if you think they might have a broken bone, tell them you think there might be a broken bone. It's okay. They're not going to hold you to it. It's not a court of law. So, but it helps them prepare on their way there. They can get their splints out. They can, be prepared to help and minimize their time on scene. So those are the important things. So location is number 1. You can figure all the other stuff out after you give them the location and figure out where you are. They can get people headed your way. Next. Your priorities of treatment. So part of that pact is prevent further injury, assess the situation, contact the EMS. And now we get into the life-threatening injuries. How do you decide what needs to be done first, second, third? So for those of you who, how many are current in CPR? Fairly current? Okay, so over half the class, probably a bunch of rider coaches in here. So you know that they went to CAB. So compressions first, or circulation, then airway and breathing. In a crash situation, the person's heart is usually still working. So it's not the same situation where they suddenly lost circulation because the heart stopped. So we always approach somebody to the head first as we're trying to determine consciousness. So right away, as you're approaching them and saying, are you okay? If they answer you, you've got airway and breathing. So you can skip right on to the circulation or the bleeding. The loss of circulation and trauma most often comes from a loss of blood. So you have it's like the oil system on your bike. It's a closed system, right? So everything needs to be kind of closed up. You don't have any open things for your oil. And you've got a pump in there that's pumping the oil around. You start the bike up, the pump starts. So if the pump suddenly failed, if you could artificially pump it, you'd probably still be riding, right? So, but if the pump failed, you would need to pull over, right? And do something about it. If a hose came disconnected and the pump was still working, then what is your goal? What do you need to look for? Where did the hose become disconnected? How am I losing the fluid? So that is your focus is you got to keep it in. You got to keep the blood inside where it belongs. We then will talk about shock and what you can't do as much about, and then spinal stabilization. A lot of people want to take spinal stabilization first. They run in there, they take spinal stabilization because it's easy and they know what to do. And it's kind of like, oh shoot, I didn't do all the other stuff first. Yes. So I brought my little friend with me. This is Annie Rebel. She has her own case that says stuff under this. So, so she's been hanging around bikers for so long, she's even been tattooed. Yeah, that's what happens. Happens to you too. Keep hanging around. Okay, so when a person is not breathing, the way for you to determine that is to look for a rise and fall in the chest, to listen for air that might be coming through the mouth and nose, and to feel for any air that might be coming out through the mouth and nose as well. You can also feel for movement of the chest. Sometimes with all of our big bulky clothes on, it's really hard to see what's going on with the chest. So you may need to either use your trauma shears, but look for snaps, look for zippers, look for ways that you can see what's happening with that chest. And then you can go from there. So you're going to look, listen, feel in this position where you don't take your head and tip it back like you learn in CPR. Your look, listen, feel is done without doing that. So does anybody here know anybody who snores? Yeah. What do you do to make them stop snoring?
Roll on their side.
You get them rolled over on their side, or what else do you do? They
Lift
punch
their,
them? Yeah, you poke them, right? You wake them up a little bit, or you get them rolled over on their side. The same mechanism is happening in a trauma situation. This person has just become so sleepy, so unconscious, that they don't have control over their tongue, and their tongue falls to the back of their throat, which is what's blocking their airway. It makes perfect sense that you would start out by saying, are you okay? Are you okay? Try to wake them up, try to stimulate them. So we'll go to the next slide. So if the person, you don't think they're breathing, the way to lift their tongue off the back of their throat is to lift like this. Now I know it's a little bit hard to see, so we're going to go to the next slide. I want to explain this to you in a little bit more detail. This joint right here is different than the other joints of our body. We are used to this type of movement. Next slide. We have that kind of movement with our jaw. We use it when we're chewing. Because this is also a sliding joint, when we're lifting the tongue off the back of the throat, we're actually putting our finger right about where the person's ear attaches, and you push straight forward. Next slide.
Huh.
Can you go to the next slide? And that is the action. That's what we're trying to do. So when you put your finger here, if you start twisting your finger, you're just closing the mouth. But when you're doing a jaw thrust, you're sliding that jaw forward, the tongue is attached to the jaw, and it lifts the jaw off the back of the throat. There was a physician who saw a lot of kids who were choking on candy, those dumb suckers. So he created a candy that whether it got stuck like this or like this, it would have a passageway for air, and he called that candy lifesavers. When you do a jaw thrust, you don't have a big space for air to go through like you do with a head tilt chin lift. It's a smaller space, but you must have a passageway, and the tongue is the problem. Next slide. Oh, I forgot that was in there. So when you use one of these, this is the type of barrier that works best. It's more of a professional barrier. They call it a pocket mask, but it doesn't fit in my pocket. So anyway, I call it a triangular barrier. But when you use this barrier, you put the pointed part of the barrier at the bridge of the nose and you set it down. People in the back, if you want to stand up or if you want to come around so you can see better, feel free to do that. You're not like Velcro to your seats. You put your whole hand here on the barrier and I use my middle finger. I'd show it to you, but that would be disrespectful, especially. So the longest, tall man. I use tall man. I trace the jaw, I get behind that angled jaw, lift the jaw into the mask. And then you give 2 breaths. This mannequin does have an artificial tongue. If I wouldn't have lifted it off the back of the throat, I wouldn't have been able to make the jaw or the chest rise. So you give 2 breaths initially, then 1 every 6 seconds. So 5's an easy number for me to remember. I count to 5 and then on 6, I give a breath. So, so that's what you would be doing is if you needed to do rescue breathing. I can tell you that I'm a big rider. I mean, I'm an Ironbutt member. I do cross-country rides from coast to coast every year with the motorcycle cannonball and the motorcycle chase. So love to ride. I also put myself in a position to be able to help people by being at the back of the pack very frequently. And that has led to a lot of things happening. That's where all the action is, right? Do any of you do group rides or assist group rides? Yeah, action to that. So anyway, I've been there 3 times now when somebody was not breathing when I got to them. And in all situations, I lifted the jaw and the person started to breathe on their own. And I have not out in the field had to do rescue breathing for anybody. So I want you to know that that's a simple thing to do, right? Just lifting that tongue off the back of the throat. So next. So big challenge really is getting a good seal. Each breath should last only about a second. You gauge the amount of air you give to the person based on their size. You don't have to get all the air that's in your lungs. That was the old CPR. I know you took it a long time ago if you do that. So, but a barrier is really a good idea. There's flat barriers that a lot of people carry. It would be this style right here on a keychain. And you do rescue breathing a little differently through that. I only have something one time, so I'm not going to go there right now, I'm just telling you. But a barrier is a great idea. Next. So what else gets in the way? You know, what gets in the way of a person being able to address what's going on with the mouth is potentially the full face helmet. I'm not talking as much about a modular helmet, but the modular helmet might interfere with your ability to control the airway. What a modular helmet is when you flip that chin bar up, and I'm speaking to the preacher in the choir right now, but when you put the chin bar up, you now have access to their face. If you have to do jaw thrust rescue breathing, it might get in your way because it's meant to really protect that person's jaw. And it's very tight through here, and it might make it hard for you to get your fingers in there. So the guiding principle, according to the next slide, is if the helmet interferes with your ability to control the airway, it must come off. That's what it is. The first thing you see as you're approaching somebody is whether or not they have a full face helmet on. So that's determined on the approach. The next thing you're going to do is when you get there, determine whether or not they are breathing. Well, if they're talking to you, they don't need you to take it off, right? So that's not why you take it off, not unless, of course, they're throwing up in the helmet. So not everything is breathing, not breathing. So if it interferes with your ability to control the airway. So we're going to do a little helmet removal demo, and I'll ask Twain and Penny to come on up here and give me a hand. So we'll go on to the next slide. It's really easy. Look at, there's all these steps. Would you like to be the puller or the catcher?
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter.
What's easier for you to
I'll have you be the
Puller
puller.
that way?
Yeah. So, and Twain's gonna come to this side. He's actually gonna hold Annie down. I was trying to think of how we were gonna be able to do this.
Okay, good.
I was trying to think of how we were gonna be able to demonstrate this for you, because getting down on the floor means we're gonna kind of not be able to be videotaped. So we're gonna do this on Annie instead. And what Twain's gonna do is help hold her down because she's so light that we'll take.
So I don't
helmet
pull the
off of
whole
this.
thing off.
And I'm gonna actually grab her vest.
Got a problem like
So Penny is gonna be the puller and I'm gonna be the catcher. So essentially, one person is going to.
He's not breathing.
Be in control of the helmet, and I will be catching the head as it comes out of the helmet. Okay, so first thing that she's gonna do is hold this still so I can get in here and undo the chin strap. That chin strap might be pulled so tight that the reason the person's not breathing is that they, that is choking them. So if you can't get in there and undo the chin strap because it's so tight, a trauma shear is great. But buck knives, you guys, no buck knives, not in the neck. I'm gonna hand these straps to Penny. And she's gonna pull out on the straps a little bit to compress the foam of the helmet. Now she's going to be in control of getting this helmet off, and my hand is a C-clamp right here in the jaw, and my lower hand is against the helmet. So Penny's gonna go ahead and start
ready?
rotating. I'm ready. Thank you for communicating with me. She's gonna let me know when the helmet's about to come off, okay?
You got
And
the back of the head?
I am ready.
All right.
Okay, helmet came off. Now she's gonna take this,
Want me to put this
Yep.
first or?
Mhm. she's gonna fill the space that was left underneath the person's head. So we don't lift the head to put anything underneath, but she fills that space, and now she's gonna come back and hold on either side of the head before I let go. So that way the hands are constantly there and constantly holding the head. The basic rule that you are following when it comes to movement is that less movement is better.
So if the person's head is to the side, you leave it to the side.
No, of course, her head doesn't rotate, but your head, you would rotate the head into an inline position. You do it at about the speed I just showed you. So if you feel any resistance as you're doing that, you would stop and take the helmet off in that position. But if it goes nice and smooth and there's no resistance, just straightening that neck out sometimes allows the person to breathe. So the nose would be straight with the body when I talk about alignment. Okay, do you guys feel good that you, all right, thank you.
But if you take the class, you get to practice this.
Yes, I did bring an extra large helmet and I was gonna ask for someone with an extra large head. But that actually really shows you, oftentimes you're filling that much space on a real human being. You're putting that much underneath their head to fill the space. And if you didn't do that, then, and the whole principle is less movement is better, you took that helmet off carefully and now you're gonna go like this to put that helmet down. So it's not about getting anything underneath the neck. That's not necessary at all. So the next slide. So circulation, that's bleeding. You got to find and control bleeding. So I know you were asking about Stop the Bleed program, and that is very important. Stop the Bleed is a great thing to know. It is what we teach in our program. We teach all the elements of Stop the Bleed or Stop the Bleed. But you want to look for and handle obvious external bleeding first. The internal bleeding, there's not that much you can do about it. So find the bleeding, find the hose that's disconnected and take care of that first. You can skip past the oozing things like the road rash. So that oozing is not going to cause life-threatening bleeding. You're looking for something more serious. It's really your arms and your legs that you can do the most about. So look at those areas. That's where you can do a pressure dressing. You can do a tourniquet. So there's much more you can do in those areas. Hemostatic dressings, things like Quick Clot, they're great for you to carry. Sometimes they're a little bit big and bulky. They can be pricey, about more than a trauma kit you'll spend on one dressing. It's kind of big. But there are other smaller items. If you look for calcium alginate, There's some other things that are out there that do bleeding control that are smaller and easy. So tourniquets are very important. We can go to the next slide. Your pressure dressing would be first. So a lot of bleeding can be stopped without putting a tourniquet on. And you're going to use, I brought this much stuff. You can do a lot with just this. Gloves, a roll gauze, some flat gauze, and a triangular bandage. You can make a MacGyver tourniquet from a triangular bandage. So I don't have time because it's like, I'm supposed to be done right now. Okay, and next. So you can do a tourniquet, and you can use a cat tourniquet. It's going to the bleeding control is important. Keep your person calm, keep it flat. Next. And taking spinal immobilization, stabilization. So they went from being immobile to stabilization. While I'm doing this last summary slide, anybody who does not have a pass card and one of these and a ticket to win a trauma pack. Is there anybody here that does not have this? Keep your hand up. Wayne and Penny will come around and make sure you have one. Because we're going to draw for a trauma pack. Okay? Get in a good position where you can stay there for a while and remind that person that less movement is better. Yes. So prevent, your first thing is prevent further injury. Second thing is assessing the situation. We're then going to contact the EMS and treat the injured with life-sustaining care, concentrating on our ABCs of trauma, airway breathing, circulation, which is bleeding, shock, and spinal immobilization. Would you come up here?
Me?
You.
So if I pick my elbow,
You.
I still win.
Yep, you still win. There's no way, no wonder drive. And we're gonna draw, you must be present to win. And
Just last three, 7, 8, 9.
what, you might have to do it.
Okay, 1, 7, 9, 7, 8, 9.
789, woo-hoo, you are the proud winner of a trauma pack. Trauma shears in there, rescue breathing barrier, and some gauze. I'm sorry, everybody, I kind of went over a little bit, but I want to let you go. If you have personal questions, you can come and ask me. We'll be hanging out for a bit.
How can we get one of those?
Thanks much. There's a trauma pack brochure out there.
Okay.
Thank you. I just have listening.
That's what I use for my inventory.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Would you throw this away from me and then I'll.
If everyone can take a moment to let us know what you thought about the session, there's a survey, it's one question and comment.
I really like your QR codes to be able to do that. That was so much fun. They are, they have it, it's gonna be posted, the slide presentation.
Oh,
They
the slide
posted on Look, Learn, Learn.
Yes.
Yes.
Because I thought I might give it to, show it to our club.
Oh, yeah.
Club meetings. Thank you.
You gotta get one of those cards back there. Be there.
Doing great, doing